He saved the albino Apache woman at midnight. By sunrise, her mother claimed his ranch. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It's a tale of fate, courage, and the unexpected twists of life in the wild American West. Late one cold night, under a dark sky dotted with stars, a lone cowboy named Jack rode through the rugged desert of Arizona, his horse's hooves pounding softly on the dirt trail. He was returning to his small ranch, the kind of place most people would consider too isolated to ever make a difference in anyone's life. Jack was used to solitude, working the land alone since his father's death years ago. He had no family left to speak of, just the cattle and the wide, empty spaces around him. But tonight, as he rode through the shadows of the desert, he heard something that made his heart race. It was a cry for help, weak and distant, carried by the wind. Jack's instincts kicked in. He had been raised to help those in need, and despite his preference for isolation, he couldn't ignore the desperate voice echoing in the night. He spurred his horse onward, following the sound, until he came upon a figure lying by the side of the road. At first, he thought it was a mirage, the way the figure shimmered in the moonlight. But as he drew closer, the truth became clear. It was a woman, a young Apache woman, her clothes torn, her body bruised, and her skin so pale under the moonlight that Jack immediately realized something was different about her. She had the unmistakable white complexion of an albino, an anomaly among the people of the Apache tribe. Her eyes, wide with fear, met his as he dismounted. She was barely conscious, struggling to sit up, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Jack knelt beside her, his heart racing as he tried to assess her injuries. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice low but filled with urgency. The woman's lips parted, and in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. They are coming for me." Her words made Jack's blood run cold. He looked around, scanning the desert for any sign of movement, but all he could see were the silhouettes of distant mountains. The woman's eyes were pleading with him, and he knew he had to act fast. He helped her onto his horse, lifting her with surprising gentleness, and urged his steed to move swiftly. The journey back to his ranch was treacherous, the trail winding through the desert like a maze of shadows. Jack's mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? Why had she been left to die alone in the desert? And who was chasing her? He had no answers, only a growing sense of unease as he rode faster, his eyes darting back and forth across the barren landscape. When they finally reached the safety of his ranch, Jack carried her inside, laid her down on his simple bed, and tended to her wounds as best as he could. It was clear she had been badly beaten, but there was something else about her that he couldn't ignore. Her presence, her quiet strength, and the sense of mystery surrounding her. As the night wore on and the fire in the hearth crackled softly, Jack kept watch over her. He knew that whatever had brought this woman to his doorstep was far from over, and by sunrise, his life would never be the same again. As the fire crackled in the hearth, Jack sat beside the bed where the albino Apache woman lay, her breathing steady now, though still shallow. He had done what he could to tend to her wounds, but there was little he could do for the deeper marks of bruises that covered her arms and legs. Her skin was pale in the firelight, almost glowing against the rough blankets he had thrown over her. It was strange, the way she looked. The way her pale skin contrasted with the dark shadows of the desert, like she didn't quite belong, yet somehow had always been meant to be here. He had never met anyone like her before, and the circumstances of their meeting troubled him. Who was she? Why was she in his life now, and why had she been left to die alone in the desert? He didn't know the answers, but one thing was for sure. He couldn't turn his back on her. The woman stirred in her sleep, a soft moan escaping her lips. Jack leaned forward, his heart racing. He wasn't sure if it was the sound of her voice or something in the air that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, but he felt as if something was coming. The danger he had sensed earlier hadn't gone away. It lingered in the air, like the stillness before a storm. Hours passed, the moon rising high in the sky, casting its pale light through the small windows of his cabin. Jack sat there, unable to sleep, listening to the night sounds of the desert, the whispering wind, the occasional rustle of a creature moving through the brush. And then, just as the first light of dawn began to break, he heard it. The sound of hooves in the distance, a steady, rhythmic pounding against the earth. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew that sound. It was the sound of riders, and they were coming fast. He rose quickly, moving silently through the cabin to the small window, his hand instinctively reaching for the rifle resting by the door. He peered out into the dim morning light, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make out the shapes in the distance. There were at least 5 riders approaching, their horses kicking up a cloud of dust as they raced toward his ranch. Jack's pulse quickened. He didn't know who they were, but he knew they weren't coming for a friendly visit. His instincts told him they were looking for trouble, and that trouble was probably the woman in his cabin. Without thinking, he moved to her side, gently shaking her shoulder. "Wake up," he whispered, his voice urgent. She blinked her eyes open, disoriented for a moment before meeting his gaze. "What's happening?" she asked in a hoarse voice. "They're coming," Jack said, his voice low and filled with warning. "We have to leave." She pushed herself up, her body stiff and slow as she fought through the pain, her eyes never leaving his. Jack helped her to her feet, his mind racing. There was no time to waste. They had to get out of the cabin before those riders arrived. But where could they go? The ranch was isolated, surrounded by miles of desert and harsh terrain. If they ran, they wouldn't get far. And if they stayed, the odds weren't in their favor. He grabbed a small pack of supplies and slung it over his shoulder, motioning for her to follow him. Together, they slipped out the back door, careful not to make a sound. The riders were close now, almost at the edge of the ranch. Jack could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him, but he kept moving, urging the woman to stay close. They had no plan, no escape route. They were simply running, hoping to outrun whatever fate was chasing them. As they made their way toward the hills behind the ranch, Jack's mind raced. Who were these men, and what did they want with her? He didn't know, but the thought of what might happen if they caught them made his stomach turn. And then, just as the riders reached the edge of the property, something unexpected happened. From the top of the hill, Jack saw a figure moving toward them. It was a woman, tall and powerful, with long dark hair flowing behind her. She moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on the two of them as if she had been expecting them all along. Jack stopped in his tracks, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know who this woman was, but her presence sent a shiver down his spine. The woman continued to move toward them, her footsteps steady and confident. As she drew closer, Jack could make out the features of her face, strong, weathered, but filled with an unmistakable power. This was no ordinary woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, and Jack knew that whatever happened next, his life was about to change forever. The woman stopped in her tracks as she saw Jack and the albino Apache woman. Her piercing gaze locked onto the pair, and her powerful presence seemed to fill the air. Jack stood frozen for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. There was something undeniable about her, something about the way she moved, the confidence in her stride, the undeniable authority that radiated from her. She was no stranger to conflict, and Jack could sense it. She reached them in a few strides, her eyes never leaving the Apache woman at his side. "Who are you?" Jack asked, his voice steady but wary. The woman's eyes flickered toward him briefly, acknowledging his question but not answering. Instead, she spoke directly to the Apache woman, her tone low and controlled. "It's time for you to return home." Jack felt a surge of confusion. Return home? The Apache woman at his side, still fragile and weary, had barely spoken, but Jack could see the fear flash in her eyes as she heard those words. She shook her head slowly, her voice soft but firm. "I can't go back," she whispered. "They'll kill me." The tall woman's expression didn't soften. She merely looked at Jack for a long moment, as if assessing him. Then, without breaking her gaze, she said, "You've brought her here, so now you must understand. She belongs with us." Jack could feel the tension in the air. The woman before him wasn't just any Apache warrior. She was someone important, someone with power. He didn't know how or why, but the truth was clear. This woman was here for a reason. The albino Apache woman, whose name Jack still didn't know, looked down at the ground, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Please, you don't understand. I can't go back to the tribe. They believe I've brought shame on them. I've seen things, terrible things. They'll never forgive me. The tall woman's gaze softened slightly, but only for a moment. She took a step closer to the Apache woman and placed a hand on her shoulder. They don't need to forgive you, she said. They need you. Your mother needs you. Jack felt a chill run down his spine at the mention of the woman's mother. It was clear that her mother was someone of great importance, and whatever the young Apache woman had done, it was serious. The tall woman turned back to Jack. You've done what you could, but now it's time for us to take over, she said, her voice calm, yet filled with an underlying power. She belongs to the tribe. She always has. Jack didn't know what to say. His mind raced with questions, but before he could voice any of them, the sound of hooves reached his ears. Several riders were approaching fast from the same direction the woman had come. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He knew. The riders weren't here to negotiate. They were here for the Apache woman, and they weren't about to let her go without a fight. The tall woman seemed to sense the danger, and her hand went to the hilt of the knife at her waist. Get inside, she said to Jack. Now. Without hesitation, Jack pulled the Apache woman along, ushering her into the cabin, just as the first of the riders crested the hill. The riders, a group of 5 men on horseback, looked rough, their eyes scanning the area, searching for something or someone. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as they got closer, but the tall woman was already moving, stepping out of the cabin with a calm determination. She raised her hand, signaling the riders to stop. The leader of the group, a man with a scar running across his cheek, frowned as he reined in his horse. What's going on here? He demanded. The tall woman stood her ground, her eyes hard and unflinching. This woman is under my protection, she said coldly. The leader sneered. Protection? From who? The woman's gaze flickered briefly to Jack, then back to the men. From me, she said firmly. The riders hesitated, clearly unsure of how to proceed. It was evident that they weren't used to being challenged by a woman, especially not one who carried herself with such authority. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension. Jack held his breath, his eyes darting back and forth between the woman and the riders. He knew that if this situation escalated, there wouldn't be much he could do. The tall woman stepped forward. Leave now, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Or face the consequences. The leader of the riders glared at her, then at the cabin behind her. Finally, he spat on the ground. You'll regret this, he muttered, before turning his horse and riding off. The other riders followed suit, their horses kicking up dust as they left. Jack stood in stunned silence, the weight of the situation sinking in. He looked at the tall woman, who was now walking back toward him, her expression unchanged. It's not over, she said quietly. But for now you're safe. The next morning, the sun rose over the distant horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the desert, but the air was thick with tension. Jack sat on his porch, his hands gripping a cup of coffee, staring out at the empty land around him. He couldn't shake the feeling that everything was changing, and not just because of the Apache woman. No, it was something deeper, something that had been set in motion the moment she had stepped into his life. The silence of the desert felt like an echo of the uncertainty that hung over him. What did all of this mean? Why had she come to him for help? And why was this woman, who had been abandoned in the wilderness, now suddenly the center of everything? His thoughts were interrupted by a sound in the distance, hooves approaching. He stood up, his heart pounding in his chest, and scanned the horizon. This time, it wasn't just a few riders. No, there were many. At least 20 of them. Jack felt a chill run through him. He knew who they were. It was the Apache woman's tribe, led by none other than her mother, the powerful leader who had claimed his ranch the night before. Jack didn't have to wonder for long. The riders approached, their faces hard and determined, their horses kicking up dust as they neared. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of his property. The woman from the night before, her mother, dismounted first. She was tall, with a commanding presence, her gaze fierce and unyielding. Jack could see the weight of authority in her eyes. She was the leader of her people, and nothing could challenge her power. She moved toward him slowly, with purpose, while the rest of her warriors dismounted behind her, standing at attention, their eyes scanning the land, their hands resting on weapons. This land is mine, the woman said, her voice calm but filled with a sharp edge. Jack swallowed hard, his chest tightening. He hadn't forgotten the words she had spoken to him the night before. He had known this was coming, but now that it was here, it felt real. Too real. He tried to steady his voice. "You can't just take my ranch," he said, but the words felt weak, powerless against the strength of her presence. The woman's eyes softened for just a moment, but only for a moment. "I'm not here to take it, Jack," she said, her tone almost kind. "I'm here to claim what was always meant to be mine." Jack's heart sank. What was she saying? The Apache woman, the one he had helped, was more than just a victim. She was a key to something far larger than he could have imagined. "Your daughter," he began, his voice shaking. "What is all of this about? Why did she come to me?" The woman took a step closer, her eyes never leaving his face. "She came to you because she knew you would help her," she said simply. "But more than that, she came because it's time for the past to be resolved. The land you stand on was once ours. It has always been ours. Your father knew that. But you, Jack, you do not know it yet." Jack felt the weight of her words settle over him like a storm. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of old land disputes, but he had never imagined that his father's actions, his own existence, would be tied to this tribe, to this land, in such a profound way. He looked at the woman, at the warriors behind her, at the vast expanse of desert stretching out before him. And then, for the first time, he understood. This wasn't just about land. It was about legacy, about blood, about something far older than he had ever realized. "What do you want from me?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman met his gaze, her eyes hard, but with a glimmer of something deeper, something more ancient. "I want you to understand that this land is part of our people's heritage. And now, it will be part of yours too. You have a choice, Jack. You can stand with us, or you can stand against us." Jack didn't know what to say. His entire world was spinning. The simple life he had built, the small piece of land he had tried to protect, none of it seemed to matter now. The woman's presence was a reminder of a past that had been buried, but that was now rising up to claim what was once its own. As the warriors began to gather around, Jack realized that the choices he had made up until now had been nothing compared to the decision that lay before him. The future, his future, and the future of this land, was no longer in his hands alone. As the days passed, the weight of the decision Jack faced hung heavily over him. He had never imagined that his life would lead him to this point, a crossroads between his inherited land and the fierce Apache tribe who now claimed it as their own. The woman, the powerful leader, had given him an ultimatum: join us or face the consequences. But Jack had never been one to simply follow orders, and now, more than ever, he needed to make a choice. He spent countless nights staring out into the desert, trying to sort through his thoughts, trying to understand his place in all of this. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of the tall woman and the Apache warriors filled his mind. But there was something else, something deeper, that gnawed at him. It was the memory of his father. What had he known? Had his father been involved with the tribe in some way? Had he known that this land, the land Jack had inherited, belonged to the Apache? Jack didn't have answers, only questions. And each one seemed to open a door to more questions, leading him further away from the life he had once known. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Jack walked out to the edge of his ranch, the place where he had always felt at peace. The quiet stillness of the desert had always been his refuge, but tonight, it felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the land itself was holding its breath. As he walked toward the barn, he saw the familiar shape of the tall woman standing at the fence, watching him with those penetrating eyes. She didn't speak at first, but her presence alone was enough to make Jack pause. He had expected this moment, but he still wasn't ready for it. "You've been avoiding me," she said, her voice calm, but with an edge. Jack didn't deny it. He had been avoiding her, avoiding the reality of the situation. But now, standing in front of her, he knew there was no more running. "I need answers," he said, his voice low. "I don't understand. My father, what did he know about this land? About you?" The woman's gaze softened for a moment, but there was no trace of sympathy in her eyes. "Your father knew more than you think," she replied. "He knew this land would win. They returned to us. He knew what was coming." Jack felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "But why didn't he tell me?" he asked, his voice trembling with the weight of the realization. "Why didn't he prepare me for this?" The woman's eyes darkened. Your father's actions were his own, she said, her voice hardening. He chose to live his life in silence, to keep his promises to the tribe and to protect his family. But now, the time has come for the truth to be revealed. Jack stared at her, his mind spinning. The truth. What truth? I've done nothing wrong, he said, his voice rising. I've worked this land with my own 2 hands. I've earned everything I have, and now you're telling me it all belongs to you. The woman stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. What you've earned is not the question, she said. The question is whether you will honor the past and stand with us, or whether you will fight us and face the consequences. Jack felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had never been one to back down from a fight, but this wasn't just any fight. This was about his land, his legacy, and the very foundation of his life. The woman took another step forward, her voice quiet but firm. The Apache have always known the value of land, she said. But we also know that it is the people who make the land worth fighting for. Your father understood that. And now, you must decide whether you will continue his legacy or stand against it. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the ground shifting beneath his feet, and he knew that whatever decision he made now would change everything. He had no choice but to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. I'll stand with you, he said, his voice steady, though his heart was anything but calm. But not because I have to. I'll stand with you because I believe in what you're fighting for. The woman's expression softened for the first time, and Jack saw a flicker of something, respect, perhaps, behind her eyes. Then you are ready, she said, her voice filled with quiet approval. Together, we will take back what is rightfully ours. The days following Jack's decision were filled with tension. Every sunrise brought a sense of impending change, a feeling that everything he had known about the world was slipping away. The woman, the Apache leader, had stayed at his ranch, and together they began preparing for what was to come. Jack had never been part of something so important, so rooted in the history of a people he barely understood. The weight of his decision settled deeper with each passing hour, but there was no turning back. The Apache warriors, a fierce and loyal group, had rallied around Jack, and now he was not just a rancher, but part of something larger than himself. His days were filled with strategy, with lessons about the land, about the people who had lived here long before settlers like him ever arrived. As he worked alongside the warriors, helping prepare defenses, something began to change inside him. He no longer saw his ranch as just a piece of land, but as a part of a greater legacy. As Jack stood on the edge of his property, looking out over the wide, barren desert, he could feel the shift in the air. The winds were changing, and with them, the future of this land. The Apache were coming. They had spent years in silence, waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was theirs. And now, the moment had arrived. The woman, whose name Jack still didn't fully know, had become something more than just a leader to him. She was a symbol of strength, of resilience. And as they stood side by side, watching the horizon, Jack knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The night before the arrival of the Apache warriors, Jack stood outside the cabin, his rifle in hand, listening to the sounds of the desert. It was quiet, too quiet. The winds had died down, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. The silence was broken by the sound of hooves in the distance, growing louder by the second. He turned to see a group of riders approaching, their figures outlined against the moonlit sky. It was them. The Apache had arrived. Jack's heart raced as they came closer. There were 20 of them, riding in perfect formation, their faces masked, their expressions unreadable. At the front of the group, Jack saw the woman, the leader, riding with a steady confidence, her eyes fixed ahead, unwavering. They stopped just short of the cabin, the riders forming a loose circle around Jack's ranch. The air was thick with anticipation. The woman dismounted first, her movements fluid and graceful, like a predator prepared for battle. She stepped toward Jack, her eyes locking with his. "It's time," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of what was to come. Jack nodded, his throat tight. "I'm ready," he said, though he didn't fully understand what that meant. He had promised to stand with her, but now, with the warriors surrounding him, he felt the full force of the moment. The woman turned to the warriors, raising her hand in the air. They all dismounted in unison, and for a moment, the desert was silent again, save for the sound of the horses shifting on the dry earth. The warriors stood at attention, waiting for their leader's command. Jack had seen their strength, their discipline, but now, as they prepared to take back the land, he saw something else in their eyes: resolve, honor, and a fierce determination to reclaim their birthright. The woman spoke to them in their language, her voice commanding and strong. Jack couldn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. She was preparing them for something monumental. When she finished speaking, she turned to Jack and nodded. "We begin tomorrow," she said. "But first, we must face the ones who still believe they can control this land." Jack knew who she was talking about. The settlers, the ones who had claimed the land before. They were waiting for a reason to strike, to take what wasn't theirs. But now, they would have to face the Apache, and Jack would stand beside them, no longer an outsider. He had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. As the warriors began to prepare for the coming battle, Jack stood at the edge of the desert once more, feeling the weight of the history he was about to help shape. The Apache had waited for this moment for generations, and now, they would take back what was rightfully theirs. Jack wasn't just a witness to history. He was a part of it. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over the desert, everything would change. The morning arrived as if the desert itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable. Jack stood by the barn, the scent of dust and sagebrush heavy in the air, his thoughts racing. The Apache woman, the leader, had made it clear that today would be the beginning of something momentous. Jack was no longer just a rancher. He had joined the Apache in their fight, a fight not just for land, but for the very heart of their people's existence. His father's ranch, the place Jack had worked tirelessly for, was now at the center of this conflict. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what lay ahead, but the warriors standing beside him, their faces grim and determined, gave him a sense of strength. The woman, still a mystery to Jack in many ways, had led her people to this moment. He could see the power in her eyes, the unyielding resolve. She was the symbol of everything Jack now stood for, whether he understood it completely or not. The warriors moved with quiet precision, gathering their weapons, checking their gear, and preparing for what would come. Jack felt the weight of their expectations on his shoulders. He had promised to fight with them, to stand by them, and now the time had come to prove himself. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the tension in the air thickened. The land was vast, and the settlers who had claimed it before were out there somewhere, waiting for a confrontation. They had no idea what was coming. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the warriors move out. The woman gave him a brief nod, signaling him to follow. The group made its way across the desert, a silent force that seemed to vanish into the wilderness. Jack walked beside the woman, his thoughts still a whirlwind. He had lived a quiet life until now. The quiet hum of ranch work, the solitude of the land, had been enough. But now it was different. The Apache had become his people, and this land, once a symbol of his father's legacy, was now part of something much larger. They stopped near a ridge, overlooking a valley where the settlers had gathered, preparing for the inevitable showdown. Jack could see their campfires in the distance, the faint outlines of their tents dotting the landscape. He swallowed hard, his hand tightening around the rifle slung across his back. The woman beside him said nothing, her eyes focused on the settlement below. She knew what this meant. Jack could feel the weight of her unspoken words. "They won't back down," Jack said quietly, his voice hoarse. "We'll make them," she replied, her voice firm, unwavering. Her words carried more than just resolve. There was a promise in them, a promise that no matter what, they would not let their land go. They had waited too long for this moment. Jack turned his gaze to the horizon, the weight of everything he had learned in the past few days settling heavily on his shoulders. His life had changed in ways he hadn't anticipated, and now, with the Apache warriors at his side, he was no longer just a man fighting for his own survival. He was part of something larger, something that had been passed down through generations. "Are you ready?" the woman asked him, her voice low, a question that cut straight to the heart of what lay ahead. Jack looked at her, the leader who had brought him into this fight, who had trusted him to stand with her people. His answer was simple, but it carried the weight of everything he had come to understand. "I'm ready," he said, and with that, the final preparations were made. The warriors moved into position, their silent presence like a shadow over the land. Jack, standing with the woman, felt the enormity of the moment. This wasn't just about reclaiming land. This was about reclaiming a legacy. As they made their way toward the valley, the sun now high in the sky, Jack knew that this was just the beginning. Whatever came next, he would face it with the Apache. They had fought for this moment for so long, and now, together, they would take it back. The morning sun was high in the sky now, casting long shadows across the valley below. Jack stood beside the Apache leader, the woman whose gaze had never wavered, whose resolve had never faltered. They had made their way down the ridge with the warriors, each step bringing them closer to what would surely be a defining moment. The sounds of the settlement's preparations were faint, carried by the wind, but Jack could hear them nonetheless. The pounding of hammers, the soft murmur of voices, the unmistakable rustle of people gathering their weapons. They had no idea what was coming. Jack's heart was heavy with anticipation. The woman at his side, her face calm but determined, didn't speak. Her warriors, positioned in the rocks and crevices around them, were ready. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. Jack had never been in the midst of something so monumental, so fraught with consequence. His whole life had been leading to this, whether he knew it or not. This wasn't just a fight for land. It was a fight for the future, for a people who had been displaced, forgotten, and who now had a chance to reclaim their rightful place in the world. The woman's voice broke through his thoughts, low but firm. "They will come for us," she said. "We must strike first. Hold your ground, Jack. Stand with us." Jack nodded, his pulse quickening. "I'm with you," he replied. He didn't need to say more. The words had left his mouth, but what mattered was his resolve, his willingness to face whatever came with the Apache. As the warriors silently began to move, the air seemed to hum with tension. The ground beneath them, once familiar and peaceful, now felt charged with a strange electricity, as if the land itself was aware of the battle that was about to unfold. Jack adjusted the rifle on his back and took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had no idea what kind of fight lay ahead, but he was ready. The first rider came into view, a silhouette against the sky, moving at a steady pace toward the ridge where Jack and the Apache woman stood. It was clear that he had no idea what awaited him. Jack's heart beat louder in his chest. The woman beside him did not flinch, did not move. She was calm, waiting. Jack followed her lead, holding his breath as the rider drew closer. He could see the glint of his weapon, the faint outline of his face as he rode steadily forward. Then, in a sudden, fluid motion, the Apache woman stepped forward. Her presence was commanding, and Jack felt the tension in the air shift. The rider's horse stopped abruptly, its hooves kicking up dust. The rider looked up, eyes wide, unsure of what to make of the group before him. "Stop right there," the woman said, her voice low but filled with authority. The rider hesitated for only a moment before his hand went to the rifle at his side. Jack's muscles tensed, ready for anything. But the woman's next words stopped him cold. "You are trespassing," she said, her eyes narrowing. "This land is no longer yours." The rider's eyes flickered between the woman and the warriors hidden in the rocks around them. He looked back at his comrades, who were slowly beginning to filter in behind him. The woman raised her hand, a signal to her warriors. Without a word, the Apache sprang into action. The battle erupted in an instant, swift, brutal, and precise. Jack found himself at the center of it, surrounded by warriors who moved with practiced precision, their movements fluid and seamless. He had no time to think, only to react. The clash of steel rang through the air as Jack and the warriors fought side by side. The settlers had no chance. They were outnumbered and outmatched, caught off guard by the fierce strength of the Apache. Jack's heart raced, his pulse pounding in his ears. As the last of the settlers were driven back, Jack found himself standing in the midst of the battlefield, breathing heavily. The land was theirs now. The woman stood beside him, her gaze steady as she surveyed the aftermath. The warriors, too, had stopped, their faces hard but filled with a quiet sense of triumph. "It is done," the woman said, her voice filled with both relief and resolve. Jack could hardly believe what he had just witnessed. The Apache had claimed their land, not through years of negotiation or compromise, but through the simple strength of taking it back. And Jack, standing among them, had played a part in it. He looked at the woman, his companion through it all, and nodded. "We did it," he said, his voice still thick with the intensity of the battle. She looked at him, her eyes softening for the briefest moment. "No," she replied, her tone firm. "You did it. We all did." As the sun began to set on the reclaimed land, Jack stood at the edge of the ranch, watching the horizon. The battle was over, but the fight had only just begun in his mind. The Apache had taken back what was rightfully theirs, and Jack had been a part of it, a participant in the reclamation of a legacy that had long been buried under the weight of history. He could still hear the sound of hooves in the distance, the warriors moving in the evening light. They were strong, proud, and now they had what they came for. The woman, the leader, stood beside him, her gaze fixed on the land that had once been lost to her people. Her expression was calm, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her eyes, a sense of fulfillment that only those who had fought and sacrificed could understand. Jack glanced at her, still processing everything that had happened. He had come to this land a simple rancher, thinking his only struggle was against the land itself, against the challenges of surviving in the harsh desert. But now, after the dust had settled, he saw the world in a new light. This land wasn't just his, it was theirs, and he had a part in the return of it. "You've done something extraordinary," the woman said, breaking the silence between them. Jack turned to face her, his heart still pounding from the adrenaline of the fight. "We did it," he replied, his voice steady, though it carried the weight of what they had just accomplished. The woman nodded, her eyes softening for a moment. "Yes," she said, "but it's more than just this moment. It's about what comes next." Jack followed her gaze, looking at the land, the ranch, the horizon. There was no going back to the life he had known. The Apache were now part of it, and he was part of them. The reality of it settled in, but there was no fear, only a sense of purpose. "What comes next?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of curiosity and determination. The woman looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment, before she spoke. "We rebuild," she said simply. "We rebuild our people, our culture, our strength. And we make sure that the land we've taken back stays in our hands, that it stays free." Jack nodded, understanding her words. They weren't just about fighting for land. They were about fighting for a future, for a people who had been displaced for far too long. The fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But now, Jack had a place in that fight, a purpose that went beyond surviving. He looked out at the Apache, warriors who had fought beside him, their faces still grim, but filled with pride. They had reclaimed their heritage. They had reclaimed their place in the world. And Jack was now a part of that story. The woman turned to him once more. "You've earned your place here, Jack," she said, her voice calm, but with an undeniable strength. "This land is yours too now." Jack felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just about ownership. It was about belonging, about finding a place in a world that had always seemed out of reach. He had found his place, alongside the Apache, fighting for something larger than himself. "I'm ready," Jack said, his voice filled with the certainty of someone who had finally found their purpose. The woman gave him a small nod, her expression softening as she looked at him one last time. "Then come," she said. "There is much work to be done." As they walked together toward the gathering of warriors, Jack felt the weight of the past and the promise of the future resting on his shoulders. The land was theirs again, and they would protect it, together. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the desert. The battle was over, but the real work had only just begun, and Jack, standing beside the Apache warriors, was ready to face whatever came next.